It was a Tuesday afternoon in Clarksville, Tennessee, the kind of gray, forgettable afternoon that makes you want coffee in a corner booth. Marcus Webb, 34, eased his truck into the parking lot of Rosie's Kitchen, a diner he'd eaten at 100 times before he deployed, before the IED, before the wheelchair. He sat in the cab for a moment, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other on the door handle, running his eyes over the ramp they'd installed on the left side of the entrance. He noticed immediately that someone had parked a shopping cart in front of it. He exhaled, slow, controlled, the kind of breath you learn when you've been trained not to react. He wasn't angry, not yet. He'd learned to save that for when it counted. He reached into the back seat and clicked the harness on his canine, Atlas, a 90-pound Belgian Malinois with a black muzzle and amber eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Atlas was a certified PTSD service dog, trained at the same facility that trained dogs for Secret Service detail. He didn't bark, he didn't pull, he simply dropped to Marcus's side as if he'd been sewn there. Marcus wheeled himself around the cart, up the ramp, and through the glass door of Rosie's Kitchen. The bell above the door chimed. And that's when it happened. The waitress behind the counter, a woman in her mid-40s with bleached blonde hair and a name tag that read Diane, looked up. Her eyes moved from Marcus's face down to the wheelchair and then to Atlas. Her expression shifted, not subtly, visibly, like a door slamming shut. She crossed her arms. Marcus offered a smile, the same easy grin that had made him the guy everyone wanted on their team during 3 back-to-back tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. "Hey there, can I sit here?" He gestured toward a table near the window, plenty of room on the end for his chair. Diane didn't smile back. "We don't allow animals in here," she said flatly. Marcus kept his voice calm. "He's a service dog, ma'am. He's federally protected under the ADA. Diane tilted her head. "I don't care what he is. This is a food establishment. You'll need to take him outside or leave." The diner went quiet. Every fork stopped moving. Every coffee cup froze mid-sip. Every conversation died. And Atlas, who had never once made a sound that wasn't commanded, turned his head toward Diane, slowly, deliberately, and stared. Not growling, not lunging, just staring, like he understood exactly what was happening and was memorizing her face. Many question. What do you think Marcus said next? Did he leave, or did he stay? Keep watching, because what happened over the next 3 hours in that diner changed everything for Marcus, for Diane, and for the entire town of Clarksville. And trust me, you don't want to skip the part where Atlas does something nobody in that room will ever forget.
To understand why that moment in Rosie's Kitchen mattered so much, you need to understand who Marcus Webb was before the wheelchair. He grew up in Clarksville, the son of a Ford mechanic and a second-grade teacher. He played wide receiver for Clarksville High School Tigers, not because he was the fastest kid on the field, but because, as his coach used to say, Marcus runs like he's angry at the grass. He was determined, relentless, the kind of kid who finished every rep even when the coach wasn't watching. He enlisted in the Navy at 18 because his older brother Danny had served and because Marcus Webb had never once in his life wanted to do the easy thing. By 26, he was a Navy SEAL, SEAL Team 5, stationed at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in San Diego. He'd completed 3 deployments, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He'd been part of operations he couldn't talk about in places that didn't show up on the news. He'd carried teammates out of burning buildings. He'd gone 3 days without sleep in the Hindu Kush Mountains, surviving on Cliff Bars and cold anger. He had 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart. He never mentioned them, not once. The IED that changed everything happened on a road outside Kandahar province in the fall of 2019. Marcus's team was conducting a route clearance when the blast detonated beneath the vehicle. 2 teammates were killed instantly. Marcus survived, but the shrapnel that tore through the cab of the truck also tore through his spinal cord. He woke up in a military hospital in Landstuhl, Germany, 11 days later. His first question was about his team, not about his legs, his team. He spent 14 months in rehabilitation at Walter Reed. He learned to manage chronic pain without complaint. He learned to navigate the world from a wheelchair with the same tactical patience he'd applied to combat. He went back to Clarksville because it was home, because his mother was there, and because he refused to spend his life being defined by what he'd lost. Atlas came into his life 8 months after he returned home. The nightmares had been bad, the hypervigilance worse. Marcus wouldn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. He'd wake up on the floor of his bedroom, heart hammering, hands shaking, unable to remember how he'd gotten there. Atlas changed that. The dog could sense the onset of a nightmare before Marcus's own body registered it, would press himself against Marcus's chest in the dark, grounding him, pulling him back from wherever he'd gone. Within 6 weeks, he was sleeping 4 hours, then 6. Within 3 months, he'd started going back out into the world, to Rosie's kitchen, where he'd had his first cup of coffee after getting his driver's license, to the river trail where his father used to take him fishing, to the world, slowly, carefully, with Atlas always at his left side. Atlas wasn't a pet. Atlas was the reason Marcus was still here. Mini question. If you were Marcus, decorated veteran, Purple Heart recipient, and someone told you your service dog wasn't welcome, what would you do? Keep watching, because Marcus made a very specific choice in that diner, and that choice set in motion something that Diane had no idea was coming, something that started with a phone call and ended with a courtroom.
Back in the diner, Marcus didn't leave. He wheeled himself to the window table he'd asked about and positioned himself at the end, just as he'd done dozens of times before. Atlas settled under the table without being told, a black, breathing shadow that watched the room with calm precision. Diane walked over. Her lips were tight. "Sir, I already told you, and I already told you that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, service animals are permitted in all public accommodations. I can show you the documentation if you'd like." Diane stared at him. Then she looked around the diner, at the other customers who were watching, some with sympathy, some with discomfort. One older man in a VFW cap who was sitting up very straight and looking at Diane like she'd just said something deeply unpatriotic. "Fine," she said, "but you keep that dog on the floor." "He stays on the floor," Marcus confirmed. "That's where service dogs work." She walked away without taking his order. Marcus waited. 7 minutes. He watched Diane move around the diner with careful attention, the way you watch a situation for tactical information rather than out of anger. He noticed that she took orders from 3 tables around him. He noticed that she refilled coffee for a couple 2 booths over. He noticed that she did not return to his table. He noticed something else, too. On the wall near the kitchen was a framed sign. It said, "Rosie's Kitchen, family since 1987, and below it a smaller hand-lettered sign, "Management reserves the right to refuse service." Marcus had seen that sign before. He'd eaten here before the deployment. He'd eaten here 6 months ago, with Atlas, without incident. A different waitress, a different experience. So what had changed? He pulled out his phone and quietly began typing notes. Time, date, description of the exchange, Diane's name visible on her badge. He was a SEAL. Documentation was second nature. You logged everything. Evidence didn't lie. People did. He also sent a text to his attorney, a woman named Claire Hendricks, who specialized in civil rights cases. They'd never had cause to work together before. He had her number because Claire volunteered at the Veterans Center, where Marcus occasionally helped with job placement seminars. The text was simple. At Rosie's Diner on Fort Campbell Boulevard, being denied service with Atlas. Documenting. Claire's reply came back in 90 seconds. Document everything. Don't leave. I'm calling someone. Marcus put his phone face down on the table. He noticed the man in the VFW cap watching him. The man nodded, just once, slow and deliberate, the way old soldiers communicate. Marcus nodded back. 2 minutes later, the man stood up, walked to the counter and said, loud enough for half the diner to hear, "Diane, why isn't that gentleman being served?" Diane's jaw tightened. "It's a private matter, Bill." "Doesn't look private to me. Looks like that man has been sitting there 10 minutes with no water and no menu." The diner went quiet again, and this time the silence had weight to it. Mini question. Do you think Diane was acting alone, or was there something bigger going on at Rosie's kitchen? The answer will shock you. Keep watching, because Marcus was about to discover that Diane wasn't just a rude waitress. She was hiding something, and the moment it came out, it changed the entire story.
That evening, Claire Hendricks made a phone call. She called the owner of Rosie's Kitchen, a man named Gary Pell, who'd bought the diner from the original Rosie Beaumont back in 2016 and kept the name for the brand equity. Gary was not at the diner that Tuesday. He was at home in a subdivision off Highway 41A, eating dinner when Claire's number came up on his phone. "Mr. Pell," Claire said, "one of your employees denied service today to a disabled veteran with a federally registered service animal. Under the ADA, that's a civil rights violation. I'm giving you the opportunity to address this before we file a complaint with the Department of Justice." There was a pause. "Which employee?" Gary asked. "Diane Rourke." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll handle it," Gary said. But what Gary did next wasn't what Claire expected. He didn't call Diane to reprimand her. He didn't call Marcus to apologize. He called his brother-in-law, who happened to be the editor of a small local blog called the Clarksville Community Voice, a website with maybe 4,000 followers, mostly local Facebook traffic. And 2 days later, a post appeared. The post was titled, "Local Diner Faces Harassment from Veteran Using Service Dog Laws as a Loophole." Marcus read it over his morning coffee. The post claimed that service dog fraud was a growing problem in restaurants, that people were increasingly using fake service dog certifications to bring pets into public spaces. It didn't name Marcus directly, but it described the incident at Rosie's Kitchen. It quoted sources close to the establishment, meaning Gary Pell, suggesting that Atlas might not be a legitimate service animal. It also implied, gently but unmistakably, that Marcus had become aggressive and made the staff uncomfortable. Marcus read it 3 times. His hands were completely still. Atlas pressed his nose against Marcus's left hand, sensing the spike in his heart rate that no one else in the room could detect. They hadn't just refused him service. They tried to rewrite the story. They tried to make him the villain. Marcus called Claire. "Did you see it?" he asked. "I saw it. Gary Pell just made this significantly worse for himself." She explained. The blog post had introduced the issue into the public record. It had made specific claims that could be fact-checked and disproven, and it had given Claire something she didn't have before: evidence of intent. This wasn't an employee going rogue. This was the owner protecting and amplifying the discrimination. She also told Marcus something he didn't know yet. Diane Rourke had done this before. A quick public record search had turned up 2 prior complaints filed with the Tennessee Human Rights Commission, both involving service animal denials at Rosie's Kitchen, both settled quietly, both for nominal sums that never made the news. "He's been paying to make these go away," Claire said. "Not this time," Marcus said. Mini question. If you were Marcus and you discovered this had happened to 2 other people before you, would you settle quietly for money Or would you want something more? Stay with us, because Marcus wanted something money couldn't buy. And what happened next in that courthouse and in that diner is something the entire town of Clarksville talked about for years. Don't stop watching now. What the blog post did that Gary Pell hadn't counted on was unleash something Marcus had spent 2 years trying to keep contained. The shame. Not his shame. He'd never been ashamed of the wheelchair. He'd never been ashamed of what he'd given. What he felt, lying awake in the dark 2 nights after the Rosie's incident, Atlas's warm weight across his feet, was the deep, grinding shame of being made to feel like a problem, like an inconvenience, like someone whose presence disrupted the comfortable experience of people who'd never had to sacrifice anything. He called his mother, Sandra, at 11 p.m. "You okay, baby?" she asked. She always knew when she was hearing the call he almost didn't make. "Not really," he said, which was the most honest thing Marcus Webb could say, because saying it cost him something. "I just want to eat at a diner, Mom. I just want to sit at a window table and have someone bring me coffee and be a regular person for an hour." There was a long silence on the line. Then Sandra Webb said softly, "You have never been regular, Marcus. You have always been extraordinary, and people who can't see that, they're the ones with the problem." He didn't sleep that night, not because of nightmares. Atlas took care of those, but because of something harder to fight, the awareness that he was going to have to spend the next several months reliving one of the smallest, pettiest humiliations of his life in legal documents, depositions, and probably a courtroom. He'd survived Kandahar. He'd survived 14 months of rehabilitation. Now he had to survive a deposition about a diner. Marcus reached down and put his hand on Atlas's back. The dog stirred, lifted his head, and looked at Marcus with those amber eyes that didn't ask questions and didn't offer pity. Just presence, just steadiness. "We're going to finish this," Marcus told him. Atlas put his head back down. At the Veterans Center the next morning, Marcus ran into his friend and fellow vet, Tommy Hicks, who had seen the blog post and was, in Tommy's words, ready to physically drag Gary Pell to court himself. "Don't," Marcus told him. "Let the law do it. That's the point. You fight with the weapons you have." Tommy looked at him for a long moment. "You're the most disciplined person I've ever met," Tommy said. "No. I'm just very patient when I know I'm right." And Marcus was right. He had no idea yet exactly how right or how public that rightness was about to become. Mini question. How do you fight back when the other side controls the narrative? Marcus found 3 ways. Keep watching to find out what they were. The revenge Marcus executed wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, but it was absolutely ruthless, and by the time it was over, Gary Pell and Diane Rourke were left with nothing to hide behind. Don't leave now. Marcus Webb's revenge happened in 3 movements, each one precise, each one devastating. Movement 1, the legal strike. Claire Hendricks filed a formal ADA complaint with the U.S. Department of Justice within 72 hours of the incident. She also filed with the Tennessee Human Rights Commission. But the real move came when she connected with a journalist at the Tennessean, Nashville's major daily newspaper, who had been covering a national investigative series on ADA service animal violations. The reporter, a woman named Catherine Aldrin, interviewed Marcus for 2 hours. He brought documentation of Atlas's certification, his own VA records confirming his PTSD diagnosis and Atlas's prescribed role as a service animal, and, at Claire's suggestion, printed copies of the 2 prior THRC complaints against Rosie's Kitchen. He also let Catherine take a photo of Atlas. The photo ran above the fold on a Sunday morning, Atlas sitting upright beside Marcus's wheelchair, both of them looking directly into the camera.
The headline read, "Decorated Seal, Disabled Veteran Denied Service at Clarksville Diner for the Third Time." The story ran on a Sunday morning. By Sunday afternoon, it had been shared 47,000 times on Facebook. By Monday morning, Rosie's Kitchen had a 1.4-star rating on Yelp. Gary Pell's phone did not stop ringing. Movement 2. The community response. What Gary Pell had not accounted for was Clarksville's military demographics. The city sits next to Fort Campbell, home of the 101st Airborne Division. It has one of the highest concentrations of active-duty military, veterans, and military families of any mid-sized city in America. When the story broke, it didn't just circulate on Facebook. It circulated through military networks, through SEAL community channels, through VSO listservs. Bill Crawford, the man in the VFW cap who had challenged Diane in the diner that Tuesday, turned out to be a Vietnam veteran with 34 years of membership in the Veterans of Foreign Wars post-1581. He gave his own statement to the Tennessean, confirming exactly what he'd witnessed. The VFW post organized a response. They didn't picket Rosie's, they didn't vandalize anything. They simply coordinated a boycott. 200 members committing publicly to take their business elsewhere until the situation was resolved. Each member also agreed to leave a detailed, factual review online. Within a week, Rosie's Kitchen was hemorrhaging regulars. 3 catering contracts, including the one with the local Rotary Club, were quietly canceled. Gary Pell lost an estimated $40,000 in business in the first 2 weeks, not because anyone told people to be angry, but because people were. Movement 3. The Reckoning in the Room. The moment Marcus had quietly been waiting for came 6 weeks after the incident, in a conference room at Claire Hendricks's office on Riverside Drive. Gary Pell sat across the table in a suit that didn't quite fit him, next to an attorney Marcus had never seen before. Diane Rourke was not there. She had been terminated from Rosie's Kitchen 2 weeks prior, a fact Gary tried to use as evidence he'd taken corrective action. Claire had explained to Marcus that Gary would offer a settlement. She expected it to be somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000. She advised him to counteroffer. She'd reviewed the case and believed they could get $75,000 or more through litigation if it went to court, given the documented prior violations. Marcus had told her he wasn't interested in the money. Claire had stared at him. He'd explained what he wanted instead. And so when Gary Pell's attorney slid a settlement figure across the table, $25,000, Claire slid back a 1-page document. The attorney read it, blinked, read it again. "This isn't a standard settlement," he said. "No," Claire agreed. The document Marcus had prepared, with Claire's legal scaffolding, required the following. First, a public apology personally written by Gary Pell and published in the Tennessean and the Clarksville Leaf Chronicle, acknowledging that Rosie's Kitchen had violated the civil rights of at least 3 veterans and had made defamatory and false claims in the Community Voice blog post. Second, a mandatory ADA training program for all Rosie's Kitchen staff, conducted quarterly, administered by a certified ADA compliance trainer, and paid for by Gary Pell. Third, a $15,000 donation to the Canines for Warriors organization, which trained and paired service dogs with veterans suffering from PTSD and TBI, made publicly with acknowledgement for the reason. Fourth, the removal of the Clarksville Community Voice blog post with a published retraction by the editor. Fifth, a framed copy of the ADA service animal regulations permanently posted at the entrance of Rosie's Kitchen. Gary Pell accepted all 5 terms. Not because his attorney thought it was a good deal, because Gary Pell was looking at a federal lawsuit, a DOJ complaint, $40,000 already lost in business, and the internet that did not forget. Marcus shook Gary Pell's hand at the end of the meeting. He didn't need to. Atlas sat at his left side, watching Gary Pell with those amber eyes, patient, steady, and completely unimpressed. Mini question. Was the settlement too soft, or was Marcus's approach smarter than taking the money? Tell us in the comments. There's one more part to this story, and it's the part that will hit you hardest. Don't go anywhere.
3 months after the settlement, on a cool Thursday morning in early spring, Marcus Webb pulled his truck into the parking lot of Rosie's Kitchen. The ramp was clear. He sat in the cab for a moment. Atlas was in the back, ears up, reading the morning. It had taken Claire Hendricks exactly 1 phone call to Yelp, 1 to Google, and 1 to the Tennessee Restaurant Association to ensure the public record of Rosie's Kitchen included a note, ADA complaint resolved, training implemented, management cooperating with compliance requirements. The apology had run in the Tennessean on a Wednesday, tucked on page B4, not the front page, but it had run. Gary Pell's name had been on it. The words, "We were wrong," had appeared in black ink, in print, in a newspaper that had been serving Middle Tennessee since 1812. The Canines for Warriors donation had been announced on their social media. It had been shared 12,000 times. And on the entrance of Rosie's Kitchen, next to the door, there was now a laminated frame. Inside it, the text of the ADA service animal provisions, clean, official, impossible to miss. Marcus pushed through the door. The bell above it chimed. A young woman, early 20s, dark hair, a name tag that said Jessica, looked up from behind the counter. She saw the wheelchair. She saw Atlas. Her face broke into a warm, unhesitating smile. "Good morning. Window table okay?" Marcus exhaled. Something loosened in his chest that he hadn't realized was still clenched. "Window table's perfect," he said. He settled in by the window. Atlas curled under the table, chin on his paws, watching the morning traffic drift past on Fort Campbell Boulevard. Jessica brought water, coffee, and a menu. She didn't stare at the chair. She didn't look at Atlas like a threat. She treated Marcus like what he was, a man who wanted breakfast. Marcus ordered eggs over easy, wheat toast, and a side of fruit. He drank his coffee slowly. He watched the morning. On his phone there was a message from his mother. "Proud of you. Come to dinner Sunday." There was one from Tommy. "You know they named the Canines for Warriors donation drive after you. They're calling it the Atlas Grant." There was one from Claire. "DOJ complaint formally closed. All terms fulfilled. It's done." And there was one from an anonymous number, which Claire had traced with some effort to a disposable phone, that simply read, "You should have just left." Marcus looked at that one for a moment. Then he looked down at Atlas. Then he put the phone face down on the table, picked up his coffee, and watched the morning light move across the Tennessee hills beyond the window. He'd been told to leave before, in darker places, in more dangerous moments. He never had. He wasn't about to start. His eggs arrived. Jessica set them down with a smile and topped off his coffee without being asked. Marcus ate his breakfast at the window table of Rosie's Kitchen, just like he'd planned.
Marcus Webb didn't come back to Rosie's Kitchen to prove a point. He came back because he liked the eggs. He came back because the window table had good light. He came back because Clarksville was his town, the town he'd left at 18 with everything ahead of him, and returned to at 31 with 2 Bronze Stars and a spinal cord injury and a dog who kept the nightmares away. He came back because belonging to a place shouldn't require you to give up your dignity to get in the door. He came back because no one, no waitress, no owner, no blog post, no anonymous text message was going to tell Marcus Webb where he was and wasn't welcome in the country he'd bled for. And Atlas got a piece of wheat toast,
quietly slipped under the table that Jessica absolutely didn't see. Service dogs aren't supposed to eat on duty, but some rules on some mornings in some window booths, they're worth bending just a little. If this story moved you, share it. Not for views, for every veteran who ever had to fight for basic dignity on American soil. Subscribe, drop a comment, share with a veteran you know. They earned it.